So I would love to hear from you. It doesn't have to be a question by any means. If there's anything you'd like to ask or say about your experience of equanimity or practice in any way around that kind of theme, something you've experienced in sitting or in life about that quality, please feel free. And I need you to take the mic. You can just choose. It's up to you.
Hi, Sharon, everyone. Thank you for being here. I've been experiencing a lack of equanimity in a new situation. I've been teaching mindfulness meditation mainly in the form of MBSR for a few years, mainly in the medical setting. And I was recently invited in to teach at a homeless women's facility where women actually stay for quite a long time. They're not just being put in shelter. So my name is Stars in My Eyes, feeling what a beautiful opportunity. And to quickly find out that it's a mandatory group and many of them really don't want to be there. Which was sort of shattering to my little helpful heart. And so it's caused me to do really a lot of deep looking at, what am I doing? And my own, how to maintain a sense of myself and serve in whatever way I can serve. So anything you can shed light on that.
When I was walking by the back table, I picked up the flyer for the group on caregiving because it's a topic I'm very interested in. I think that situation where you're offering something from the heart and you're doing, the best you can, obviously, in languaging and presentation, and somebody's there because it's mandatory, can be a little disheartening. But in any caregiving situation where we're trying to be of help, the role of equanimity, actually, I find, is changing our sense of time and expectation and accomplishment. Because it might well be that even though someone is there and kind of disgruntled because they have to be there, you're planting a seed for someone. And I think in large measure, because the role of equanimity is to broaden, give us more space, get us out of a certain agenda, get us out of a certain timetable. One of the ways equanimity functions is to have us admit how much we don't know, which is often a relief. It's like, it's one thing to say, well, I've done this 6-week class and this many people got this much and that many people rejected it, but there's an underlying reality is that we actually don't know. In a year, in 2 years, in 3 years, whether someone's going to be in a real bad situation and they're going to remember something that came up in that class. There's so much we don't know. That's a beautiful understanding that just opens that perspective. My main personal experience around that, actually, I wrote about in the book Faith, where I talked about my Burmese meditation teacher, Sayadaw U Pandita, coming to Barrie, to the Insight Meditation Society in 1984 to teach this 3-month retreat. And he had a wonderful, magnificent translator with him from Malaysia. And so because it was 3 months, that meant like 90 discourses or something like that. And somebody came to me after the retreat and said, well, it's so unusual to have that fantastic a translator. So would you be interested in taking this material and trying to help create a book about it? So I said, yeah. And I raised some money and I hired a transcriber and I found an editor and found a publisher, and everyone worked really hard on the book, and it became this wonderful book published by Wisdom Publications, which is called In This Very Life, The Liberation Teachings of the Buddha. And it's very clear. It's in a certain very classical Buddhist idiom that I knew would not likely have wide appeal. I thought, okay, this will never be a bestseller, but this will be, for people who appreciate that mode of expression, it will be very clear, good manifestation of that. And so I thought, this is a nice thing to have done for my teacher. This is a nice thing to have done for those few people who will read the book. How great. So in my mind, I sort of put it in the minor good deed category. And then the other part of the story is about Aung San Suu Kyi, who's a Burmese woman who is, I'm sure has been the leader of the democracy movement, and she just got elected to parliament, but she spent, the previous 19 years pretty much under house arrest with a few periods of being released, and then having a much more constrained life again. And in those 19 years, she made many sacrifices of all different kinds, including the fact, most prominently, that her husband was British. He was living in England. He was raising their 2 children. And it was pretty clear that she would be allowed to leave Burma, but it was also quite clear, really, that she would never be allowed back in. And so, because she was and is the hope of the Burmese people for democracy, she always chose not to leave. And so she hardly saw her children, and I think they got in twice or something like that. Her husband ultimately was dying, and the Burmese government wouldn't let him back in. And, so it was tremendous sacrifice. And one of those periods where she had relative freedom, where she could talk to journalists before she was put under house arrest again, she gave an interview, and she told the story. She said, like many people of all traditions, she wanted to use her time of imprisonment as a time of spiritual development. And for her, being born Burmese, a Buddhist, that meant meditating, but she didn't really know how. So she used to sit on the edge of her bed and grit her teeth and close her eyes and try to force all thought out of her mind, and she got more and more stressed. And then one day her husband in England sent her in this book, In This Very Life, The Liberation Teachings of the Buddha by Sayadaw U Pandita. And she said she used the book to teach herself how to meditate. And she said it was the greatest source of spiritual strength she had. So I read that, and I thought, okay, I'm taking this out of the minor good deed category. I'm putting this into, this is probably the best thing I've ever done in my life category. And it changed me in some profound way that has not changed back, I notice. About those expectations, about that sense of not knowing, about feeling very strongly we have to do the good that's in front of us, even if it feels like it's going nowhere, because ultimately we don't know. And when we're lucky, like I was, that she gave that interview, sometimes we find out that the things we tried really did have some, and that effect was like a mind-blowing effect. Like, who could have imagined? So I thought at the time, I'm sure I've said this here before, that someday I would write a book called Basically Clueless. Because we kind of are, but in a good way. So you don't know. And, because it can be so discouraging, it means we do have to find other sources of inspiration to keep going in that not knowing, which could be peers, it could be community, it could be a lot of different things. And it could be the reflection that we don't know. You just got to do it.
Thank you. Or it could be coming to hear Sharon Salzberg.
Yes, thank you. Could be that caregivers group.
Hi. I have a question. I spend a lot of time with other people in the helping profession and volunteering helping, and I find that I can have equanimity at times, but then I need to separate myself and be alone to restore balance. And the problem is that I start to have stories of, see, you need to be alone to get out. There's an aversion to that I need, and I make stories about that. So I was wondering if you could comment on that for me.
Well, that I think, tends to be an old voice, and I don't think that what you're describing is like the wrong thing to do, like being alone, finding time and renewing in that way. I think it's a great thing to do, and maybe more essential than most people recognize for themselves. It could be very, very important to do, but it's the voice that's critiquing it that's kind of what's very interesting, about that. And so the question becomes, how do you relate to that voice? Because you're not talking about something either damaging or unreasonable. When I did this program, which I mentioned the other day, for domestic violence shelter workers, it was like a 4-year pilot program in New York, bringing tools of yoga and meditation to these people, and ultimately through, we started with frontline workers and then managers and supervisors and directors and executive directors in terms of dealing with stress, and burnout and vicarious trauma and so on. And so we would start out with a little questionnaire like, what tools of resiliency do you have? What do you tend to do for renewal? What good stuff? What stuff do you kind of look at and say, well, I don't know, like maybe that's not so good in the end, maybe that's more damaging to my family, or whatever it is, and so that I felt was so interesting, just sort of seeing where people were turning. And then of course we were trying to offer some other tools in addition, so that there would be that option of using the meditation, different kinds of meditation and yoga and so on. But I remember having a discussion with somebody, because if you chose to, you could read aloud what your thing was. And a number of people in one group wrote down that they would watch American Idol for just a sense of relief, And I said, as is true, oh, those things make me so tense. Like all that rejection. And, it's just like, I said, I can't bear to watch that. In fact, I was in someone's house for dinner last night, and it was the Lakers game, because I wanted to see Metta World Peace. I'd never seen it before. And it was like, I don't know, it looked like the last 2.5 minutes. I guess it went on and on, but I couldn't bear it. It's like, there's a winner and there's a loser. But there's so many things we choose that are great. They're intuitive, they're instinctive. We see they serve us, they're not hurting anybody. It may not be for everybody else, but it works for us. And then there are things we choose, of course, which are much worse and really have a big cost. And then we have to look at that and say, well, maybe I need different tools of resiliency. But that voice is so interesting. And it becomes a question of seeing that voice, recognizing it, being kind about it, but also not falling sway. You don't have to have a sense of doing battle with it. but at the same time, it sort of reminds me also of a story I tell in Faith about how some friends of ours rented a house by the ocean in Massachusetts for a bunch of us to do a retreat in. And when I went into the room that had been set aside for me, I saw that someone had left a cartoon on the desk from the Peanuts comic strip. And in the first frame of the cartoon, Lucy is talking to Charlie Brown, and she says, you know, Charlie Brown, what your problem is, the problem with you is that you're you. And then in the second frame, poor Charlie Brown says, well, what in the world can I do about that? Then in the third and final frame, Lucy says, I don't pretend to be able to give advice, I merely point out the problem. And somehow when I was doing walking meditation by that desk, my eye would repeatedly just fall on that line. The problem with you is that you're you. Because it had been, you know, that Lucy voice had been so dominant in my earlier life. But several useful things came out of that, seeing that cartoon. Like for one possible way of practicing mindfulness, which we incorporated a little bit in that last sitting, is to use mental noting, but in a more extensive way than we did. So instead of just feeling the breath, you quietly inside say in, out. If something very predominantly comes up that takes you away from the breath, you might just put a label on it, like, oh, joy, anger, thinking, if the word comes easily. So because I had done so much practice in that particular style of meditation, I felt like seeing the cartoon gave me a new mental label, which was, hi, Lucy. Or my very favorite form of that is, chill out, Lucy. Because I think that captures it. It's like, I see you, I know what you are, basically. You're a voice of the past. You're like a strong habit. You have a certain take on things, like, you know, if something great would happen for me, and my next thought would be, it's never going to happen again, I'd say, hi, Lucy. Or, chill out, Lucy. You know, it's warm, it's tender, it's not all freaked out, oh my God, Lucy's still here. It's also not this kind of abject surrender, like, you're right, Lucy, you're always right. Take over. It's like, I see you. It's okay that you came. I'm not going to buy into it. You can go. But very gentle, very kind, very clear. It's like, chill out, Lucy. And that's really the kind of the attitude or the sensibility we cultivate around these tapes that will tend to arise. So how did Metta World Peace do last night? I couldn't quite tell. No, I know they lost. I had to look it up later because I couldn't stand to watch. But did he do anything bad or good?
Hi. Thank you for being here, Sharon.
Hi.
Hi. I wanted to ask a question about, yesterday I was just listening to a book on tape from Emma Children, you know, by the book, and I know she references you a lot. So I'm having this come up about passivity. That's not so much my problem, but I was listening to a section on equanimity and developing patience by reframing your mind around what's comfortable and uncomfortable. And the part that I'm really struggling with is detaching from the things that I like. You know, I like to be passionate about the things I like. I don't want to lose that part, but I'm good to be, you know, completely zen and peaceful everywhere else. Is that awesome?
I think it actually is possible. You know, like a lot of these are fine discernments. There's one way we can enjoy tremendously and be passionate about something. And there's another way in which we can, maybe put down other people because they don't share that enthusiasm, or we get too narrow and our sense of aspiration actually gets too small. And we need to broaden it in some way. So for example, and some people would say, I really, really want a lot of money. But nobody actually really, really wants a lot of money. We don't want piles of stuff in our bedroom or something like that. We want something that money implies. We want security, or we want fun, we want leisure time, we want a chance to be generous, we want something else. So if we get too small in our view of what we want, then it's very limiting. Maybe there are 5 ways of having fun, or leisure time, or a sense of security, instead of just the one. And so mostly we need to make our ambitions or our passions bigger rather than more limited in some way. So sometimes it's a question of looking at that. And then I used the example the other day, I guess, of sometimes we get fixated on what we don't have. We're actually not that tuned into what we do have. And so it's not a question of passion anymore, it's a question of grasping. And sort of displacing what could be our genuine enjoyment right now, and just being lost in this kind of fever, about what we don't have. And, so a lot happens just from awareness of where we're at. Is this really passion and enthusiasm and delight, or has it gotten shaded with other stuff? And then we know, and only we can know. I don't think there's any reason to feel. Another way of saying it, and maybe this is what you're reading it, is that again, going back to the Buddhist psychology, when the Buddha talked about many ways we experience the world, just in terms of sense modes. He said every moment we experience the world in one of 6 ways: seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, or what he called the mind door. So the 6th sense is not something paranormal or weird. It's thinking, imagery, experiencing through the mind. So that's just another sense door. So he said, the psychology says that every moment we experience the world in one of 6 ways, and we feel that moment of hearing, that moment of seeing, that moment of sensation, whatever it is, we feel it to be pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. That this is not kind of inherent in the experience. It's a matter of a lot of things coming together. So, we might hear a sound in this room, and some people will like it, some people won't like it, some people will be amused, some people will be annoyed, and someone's cell phone can go off, and some people will think, why didn't you turn it off? And other people will think, that's a good ringtone. I want that ringtone. So it's not like the sound is unpleasant to everybody or pleasant to everybody. There are lots of causes and conditions for any particular moment to be felt by us as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. But whatever, it will be. There will be some kind of feeling tone associated with each moment of our lives. And the Buddha went on to say that our conditioned tendency when we experience something to be pleasant is to grab it, cling to it, try to hold on to it, try to keep it from changing. When we experience something as painful, our conditioning is to try to push it away, separate from it, deny it, somehow declare it to be untrue. And when we experience something as neutral, not very pleasant, not very unpleasant, our conditioned tendencies to go to sleep, to numb out, to disconnect, to kind of wait for something better to come along. And we certainly see it in this culture where we're not awfully trained to subtlety. We seem to need intensity in order to feel alive, intense pleasure or intense pain. And if the intensity starts to fade, we look for the next intense thing, more intense thing. So we experience every moment as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. We have the conditioned response of holding on, pushing away, or numbing out. So classically, it's grasping, aversion, and that particular numbing out is called delusion. There are a lot of other ways the word delusion is used, but in that sense, that's what it means. It's like disconnecting. And the Buddha went on to say, there is the possibility of fully experiencing the pleasure of something completely, but without that extra thing of the clinging. And actually fully experiencing the pain of something without the condemning, but with an open heart instead. And there's a way of actually waking up and connecting to the neutral experiences that come our way. And that's exactly what mindfulness is, by definition. It's a mode of awareness where we're not adding grasping, aversion, or delusion to that moment's experience. Now, a lot of people come into meditation, I see, and kind of have the idea that if you get really good at this, and you work hard and you get good and you get some accomplishment, everything's going to flatten out. There won't be a whole lot of pleasure, but that's okay, because there won't be a whole lot of pain, or maybe it's not okay. But it's like a projection. Some people long for it, that kind of gray blob where nothing much feels like anything, and other people dread it. But it's not what happens anyway, because this is actually a sequence. We have a moment of hearing, maybe we hear a conversation. It's not just passively sitting and hearing a sound, but we hear, we see, any of the sense doors get awakened. We feel it to be pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Then comes the reaction. So that felt sense of pleasantness, unpleasantness, neutrality is not going to be wiped clear. Some of the reasons why maybe we feel almost everything to be unpleasant, those reasons might be, those causes and conditions might start dissolving. So, the valence can change, but it's not that everything is going to become just kind of neutral and even, and there won't be any pleasure, and there won't be any pain or anything like that. And so there might be a full-on, very intense sense of pleasure or pain even. But we're so different with it that we're not spiraling out into those old habitual ways of being. So
thank you, that was very helpful.
Okay, great, thank you.
Hi. I'm not really sure what my question is, but I can describe the situation. When you're in a one-on-one conversation with somebody who requires a lot of validation, that you're there listening, and I can listen with a certain sense of equanimity without responding real quickly, and I hear everything they're saying, but apparently they don't think I do or something.
Yeah.
And then their anxiety, this is what I think happens, their anxiety builds, and they push me harder to get a response than my anxiety builds, and then that's it. How do I, can you comment on that at all?
Yeah, I think that is a fairly common experience. I think for ourselves, it's always good to know our own motivation, like where are we coming from? Like, are we just waiting out the conversation? Or is it actually equanimity? You know, are we really there? And it's always good just to check, because then we get a read on, you know, what we actually want, or what our motivation is in that situation. It's always a good thing. And then I think there are just certain skills. It'll never be perfect, because one of the core understandings about equanimity is praise and blame. You know, we're always going to get praise and blame for what we do, and we'll certainly talk a lot more about that. Like, you say something or you say nothing or whatever it is, some people are going to like it, some people are not going to like it. So it's not like we're going to get a perfect score ever. But we also learn certain skills just almost out of kindness, like so that a person feels they're, you know, being heard. Like, even just wow, that seems like it's really hard, or something, you know. I have a friend who used to live here who was had a certain role in the film industry, and I used to ask him, like, what do you say when, you know, you go to a screening or something and you really didn't like it? Like, what do you say to the person who made the film? And those are always very funny questions, you know. So he gave me some of his repertoire, like, what a film. And someone else told me a story about hearing a truly ghastly singing performance from someone's daughter, poor daughter, who was enlisted in a dinner party and that she was at, and the person who had brought her to the dinner party said afterwards, "I couldn't be more surprised." You know, and the subtext was that the glass didn't shatter, but there's no need to go there, actually, right? So some of it is actually just a certain kind of skill. I went to, I think it was Seattle, and I heard the Dalai Lama speak, and I was really amused, because he was saying something like, perhaps it's not so skillful to say it's cold in the room, because maybe not everyone is feeling cold. Perhaps it's more skillful to say, I am feeling cold. And I thought, oh my God, he sounds like every communications coach from California I've ever heard. And I thought, who's he been talking to? And then I thought he's probably been talking to communications coaches from California. Because even though one might find that kind of thing somewhat cliched, like use I language, not use you language, it actually can make a difference, right? And you know, it's like if you go to the movies with someone and you walk out and your friend says, that was the greatest movie ever made. It's like they have now taken up all the space in the universe. And there's not really room for you to say, well, I didn't like it that much. Whereas if they walked out with you and said, I loved that movie, there's still some space for you to say, you know, I didn't like it that much. So there's a kind of an effect of certain kinds of speech that we can learn greater skill with, for sure. But beyond that, I think that one of the core teachings about equanimity is what the Buddha, you know, which we'll go into a lot more later, it's what the Buddha called the 8 vicissitudes of life, of pleasure and pain, gain and loss, praise and blame, fame and disrepute. Saying that that is life. That's the very fabric of life. There's always going to be that. You know, and we'll talk more about praise and blame, but it's one way we can really understand that teaching, because you know that you can say one thing and some people will like it and other people will not like it, or there's so many causes and conditions that go into someone else's reaction to what we say that we can't really count on that as the measure of our integrity or how well we've done, you know, because it's sort of endless permutations. You know, maybe they didn't get any sleep the night before. Maybe something last week they found kind of amusing is now irritating to them because of that lack of sleep. Maybe they checked their cell phone message just before that conversation and found out they won $10 million in the lottery. You know, it's, they couldn't care less about us, you know, at that moment. Or whatever. You know, there's so many things that go into it, and yet our hearts break all the time because we think, wow, I'm doing the best I can, you know, I'm here. And we don't tend to look at our motivation, we don't tend to look at the skillfulness of our action, you know, what we said or what we did, as the basis for our sense of integrity or whatever. We tend only to look at their reaction, and then we're lost because we could never control it.